Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Every Wednesday, 5 to 7, we are interacting with all of you. And today we have cross-border investigations, which will be taken by very, very learned and experienced speakers, CA Vicky Gala. Vicky, welcome to you. And we have very young and dynamic moderators today, CA Bhavin Kubadia and CA Fenil Doshi. I welcome both of you, and our own secretary, CA Aarti Bansal, who is taking care of all your needs. And all my dear participants, it is our endeavor to work to support all of you and do the best and serve the knowledge. And every week we are coming out with this webinar series. And friends, recently, day before yesterday, in fact, we have started with our certificate course on internal audit, online certificate course. We have also started various physical batches in different parts of our country, various certificate courses. So these are running as a concurrent audit of bank as well as internal audit certificate course. Again, our diploma course on management finance, managing finance is also going on. So these are various activities which this Board of Internal Audit is doing. So friend, if you have any suggestions, please feel free to connect and let us understand what we can support you in what way. And with this basic thing, cross-border investigation in today's world has become very, very important, and accordingly thoughtful thinking into those lines, we have approached Vicky, who will be taking us through these investigations, which will be helpful in our routine internal audit work also. How we can add value to our clients, which will be served by him. So I know Vicky since last about more than a decade, and he's really doing wonderful work as a profession. So friends, stay touch, stay connected with Board of Internal Audit and Management Accounting. It is our endeavor to serve all of you the best. With these words, I welcome all of you for today's session and wish you a very, very happy learning. Thank you so much. Again, I would also forget and to acknowledge all the efforts of our chairman of the board, who is C. Prakash Sharma, who is a Central Council member also. So I would be failing in my duty if I don't recognize all his efforts, who has given us guidance and freedom to work for the benefit of members. So so once again, welcome all of you. Yeah, Bhavik, you take up now.
Yeah, good evening, friends. Today, Mr. Vicky Gala is going to present. He's going to present on the internal audit aspect, and that too in forensic investigation and intelligence. So it is my pleasure to introduce CA Vicky Gala. CA Vicky Gala is an associate managing director in forensic investigation and intelligence practice of Kroll, a global risk consulting firm. He has led 100 plus complex investigations during his work span of 18 years, and a few of such matters have those been extensively been covered in the press. He will lead this session today and touch upon the various aspects that an internal auditor or investigator should keep in mind for cross-border investigation. With this short introduction, I request CA Vicky Gala to please take up a charge of the mic and enlighten us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for giving us this opportunity, especially the Board of Internal Audit and Management Accounting. I have a slide deck to share, but I think it's going to be more interactive. I look forward to talk to you for the next 1.5 hours, at least. And what I want to tell you is that as an internal auditor, normally you play multiple roles. You'll have a multiple hats. It could be governance, could be a compliance, could be audit. And now there's an additional one which is very critical, which is investigation. So, I would like to emphasize on the investigation part. Just looking forward to share my deck. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Yes.
So, I'll directly jump into the topic. Whenever I talk about a cross-border investigation, I think about a DLTJ. The first one is about data privacy. Very important from a cross-border investigation standpoint. I will cover extensively on the data privacy aspects, which needs to be taken in mind when talk about cross-border investigation. The legal complexities. It is not the same in all the countries that you work with. If there is an investigation which goes more than from India's standpoint, there are multiple legal complexities which needs to be taken into consideration. Technology, integration of technology. Many of you would be working in corporates where there is, or maybe in consulting where, you would have seen that it is not one specific technology or an ERP or a software that an organization uses. So integration of all these at a global level is itself a question. You may have something at a country level, but just imagine a situation, you being all of us being accountants. If there's something which comes in different software, the integration itself, it's a bigger challenge. And the last one is about jurisdiction. There are certain collaborations required. We need to keep in mind about multiple treaties. So there is a lot of interjurisdictional collaboration required. Can you conduct the same type of investigation across multiple countries? The answer may be no. So I'll just quickly jump upon, a certain questions which before, so that I can have the context of, what is it that you believe would be correct. And to start with, I'll ask everyone if you could, either you can use the QR code at the right, or you can use the website called as slido.com and add this number #1097112 and add a passcode scroll. If you use directly the code, you may only have to ask for a passcode. I'll take a pause here and then, maybe I can just, this basically will help us to interact quite often. The moment you answer something, we will be able to see the results here. Hence, I'll request every one of you to log on to this. We will have a question answer session at the end of my presentation. This is more from a polling standpoint. I'll repeat, slido.com #1097112 passcode scroll, or you can just use this code. Okay, let's start. You'll have a first question coming on your mobile. If you could answer that, we will be able to see the results here. Can we follow standard procedures for a cross-border investigation as we do for domestic investigations? I'm yet to see the responses. Please write a response and press the button send. You can continue to use the code at the left. In case you're logging in from your mobile, you will be able to use this. I think we have 100+ participants, and currently his response have been only from 6 of them. Can we follow standard procedures, which we generally do for an investigation, for a cross-border investigation? I'll just wait for the last 10 seconds more. Yes, the answer is actually no. I would suggest people to type what are the key factors that you will consider when you do a cross-border investigation. Can I get some more responses? What are the key factors that you will consider when you conduct a cross-border investigation? I'm seeing some few people typing. Excellent. PMA regulations means more on the money laundering regulations. Excellent. Culture, right? Thank you. This has been helpful. So let me now actually dive upon what are the key elements for a cross-border investigation. The most important aspect to start with is the legal framework. I'll go one by one. When you talk about jurisdictional laws, the laws quite change. Like taking an example of a labor law or a data privacy or health and safety regulations, even to the extent of how do you handle evidence to be used for further litigation itself is quite different from various organizations. It is very interesting to know that there are mutual legal assistance treaties between organizations, between countries, and it's not the same. So MLATs are primarily the extent of cooperation that you could expect between nations in gathering and exchanging information. We quite often heard that there are certain tax haven countries who do not give that much information, and it's a pretty opaque culture there. Extradition treaties, I think most of you must be aware that when it comes to an investigation and it needs an arrest or a transfer of a person back to a country like India, we are still facing those issues, especially a few of these matters which have been known to everyone in the press. So the extradition treaties also play a very important role. Imagine a situation when an investigation has been conducted, someone has been already been proven guilty in one court, but still because of the extradition treaties, you don't get an access to the person. Conflict of laws. There are varied legal systems and regulations in different jurisdictions, and at times there could be a situation of a conflict of law. I have a question around it in the next slide, just to give you a more sense of what conflict of laws should be. Data protection, while fundamentally we know data protection is critical, but it's not a single act. You have multiple acts like a GDPR, India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, so on and so forth. And finally, the extent of court procedures that you would need, whether are you familiar with the legal procedures there, the court system, and how does it work? In fact, we also know that for some countries, even after you conduct an investigation, can we expect and ensure fairness from the court or the neutrality? There have been certain instances where this has been questionable. So this is overall on the legal framework standpoint. Just another question on your mobile. What would you do? Assuming a situation where there have been, and for conducting an investigation, there have been a very strict law versus a little lenient law. And if you have to conduct an investigation, what would you do? Please log on to your mobile. Can I expect a more participation on the portal? Okay, seek a legal opinion. That's helpful. Okay. Great. So I think most of the responses have been towards seeking a legal opinion. Excellent. I think the way we are accountants as experts expected to know more from an accounting and taxation standpoint, we definitely differ when it comes to a situation of knowing about the law to reach out to our legal fraternity. That's great. Also, there have been organizations who have made very clear in their policy that in situations where you have to take decisions on the spot, and we don't have an option of going and seeking a legal opinion, you may pick up which is a stricter as compared to the others. Just giving you an example, I had come across a situation where there were certain facilitation payments done in multiple countries by a certain suspects for getting the work done from their government officials. Now, while conducting an investigation, we read different laws. There are laws in somewhere when you talk about the US FCPA, it allows with a disclosure for facilitation payments. But when you talk about the Indian laws or you talk about the UK bribery law, they may not allow you, and this is basically absolutely not allowed. So depending on the jurisdiction and also depending on where you are working, the investigation ongoing, at times you may want to consider taking a strict test of both so that you are not in non-compliance. Thank you. I'll move to the next slide. Now, what are a few legal framework points that you need to keep in mind? While you conduct an investigation, generally, you you find that there could be instances of proceeds of crime. What does that mean? It means that while conducting an investigation, you learn that someone has earned money out of the fundamental, I would say, thesis of some crime. Now, when that money has been received by individual, it is called as proceeds of crime. Typically, no one should be using this proceeds of crime. But now when you talk about a cross-border investigation, assuming a proceeds of crime has been used to buy multiple real estate assets in multiple countries. Now, while conducting an investigation, it is important to get information around this and add it to your investigation report. That these are the real estate assets which are purchased potentially from proceeds of crime, which could help in tracing, freezing, and also helping in stopping using that specific real estate property. But it becomes difficult at times because when you read the international laws and agreements, it is not the same when it comes to recovery. And hence, in quite a few matters when there are cross-border investigations, getting a legal hold and seizing it for a purpose of an investigation is often challenging. I mentioned about MLATs. Interestingly, there are some MLATs which also mention when you have a multilateral treaties between nations, that an offense has to be recognized as a crime in both the jurisdiction, which means just to give you an example, not specifically related to investigation, but just to for a comparison standpoint, if smoking in a public place is a crime in one country, it may not be in the others. And hence there are these MLATs which basically say that it should be defined as a crime in both the jurisdiction for anyone to take action. What often we find issues, and you find it on the media, and also you find these such instances, is that even law enforcement agencies are not able to extend their investigation and use their powers outside their jurisdiction. Assuming a country like India, where that the law enforcement agencies have been so powerful and so vigilant in performing in investigation, but the moment the proceeds of crime and the individual is outside their jurisdiction, because of reasons of sovereignty or legal authority, quite often law enforcement agencies are not able to directly, perform any such actions. And the best way is cooperation and dialogue between the nations to get these results. Interestingly, it also means that one individual cannot be tried or acquitted for a single offense for more than one jurisdiction. So I had a case which mentioned that this is wrong in both the countries under an MLAT. And we had to reach out to a legal expert to say which rule of the land is more impactful so that appropriate action can be taken for an investigation. And thereafter, it was decided that maybe an X country has a more stricter rules and regulations, and hence, because to avoid double jeopardy, our client decided to file a complaint in that country. And last one is legal limitations and human rights. What is also important is investigation, although we are a bloodhound, doesn't mean that an opportunity of being heard is not given to the other party. Every individual has a right for a fair trial, has a right for asking legal assistance. And hence, we need to be pretty I would say we need to balance between what we can really emphasize our powers while conducting an investigation as an internal auditor and ensure that the basic rights of an individual is also maintained. Moving on to data privacy compliance, it's a very common thing. I just want to see if someone can start writing. Have you ever experienced that your personal information has been used, and when you read a message or when you get a call, you realize that without your consent, your personal information has been misutilized? It will be good for someone to give some examples. I can give a best example. Someone gave me a call for a membership and a subscription because they get to know that I travel often to that country. Now, the fact that I travel often to that country is actually not to be known. It's my personal information, but it was passed on to someone because of which this was possible. So I'll take a pause. I would be keen for people to write such experiences of yours where you believe that your personal information was misused. Interesting. I can give you another example. In a school, there was a common Excel spreadsheet maintained for all the parents to fill in the details of your child, which consisted of your child's likes, dislikes, any health issues, any dietary preference, birth dates, everything. Don't you think it's a misuse? While you have access to others' children, your child's data is also being accessed by others. Great, this has been helpful. I think what very clearly comes out is that these are more marketing related calls or marketing related approaches, which could be from real estate brokers, credit cards. What I read is Aadhaar picture was misused. It's a pretty offensive call from Bajaj Finance. Okay. Yeah. So basically it's all fake calls. Now, of course, none of us would like that. Now, what does the fundamental rule say? Identify the invisible line between accessing a personal data and seeking permission to access the same data. Quite often on your mobile, you just give me consent, and we keep giving consents, for location, for share, for our phone directory, so on and so forth. Now, this line of, a very thin line between where you need to ask for permission and where you can use is not the same for all countries. And this line keeps shifting from one country to another. That's the difference we need to keep in mind when you do a cross-border investigation. Can you use the same data that you would have got as an internal auditor in, you may say, in UK versus India, versus Australia versus Singapore, even versus Saudi Arabia? The answer is no. So we need to keep in mind all of these data privacy aspects when we do a cross-border investigation. Personal data generally refers to any data about an individual which helps us to identify that individual based on the data that we have. Very simple. Even a name or even a mobile number itself helps in identification. Multiple regulations, have set out their own standards of privacy and protection. Now, we need to conduct investigation. It is so difficult to ensure that we adhere to all of these data privacy when you do a multiple jurisdiction, or I would say multiple country driven cross-border investigations. I have these 4 points for you to consider. First and foremost, understand the data localization requirements, including the data protection and the transfer regulations. Understand the consent and notice requirements from persons whose data is being getting accessed. Understand the diverse legal environment and the regulatory bodies governing data privacy. And also understand the increased exposure to security breaches or unauthorized access while transferring data across borders. Now, I'm going to take some time in explaining a few of these in detail. Very importantly, I'll give you an example where data localization requirements means that, organizations, India and otherwise, don't even allow their data to move outside their cloud server. Imagine a situation where we are doing investigation across countries, how important it is to keep the sanctity as well as the confidentiality of the data in that specific jurisdiction only. Consent and notice requirements. A very clear, very nice example, which I'm going to give in my subsequent slides, that using the data of any individual is not the same across the countries, which means my CV or my bio and the usage of my information, even for last organizations I've worked, my mobile number, my address is different for each organization. You would all agree to the fact that all of you in your life would have received tons of CVs and bios on your Gmail, on your Office ID, on your WhatsApp, and also not from the same individual, via someone's reference. Now imagine the data which is in that CV is getting circulated in 10x, 100x, 1000x times to all the different people. Whether a notice or a consent was taken, the answer is no. But it just gets spread. Interestingly, someone joked that, maybe I would also get a CV of a person who has died 10 years ago. So, it's so common that you may just come across such situations where you don't even, as a human, as a tendency, we don't even ask for permission or ask for consent. Give another example. The legal environment doesn't allow both the parties to share the data with each other unless there is a court's order. However, this does not quite often apply if one of the parties is a law enforcement agency. And hence this concept of legally privileged and confidential comes in play. Now, whether a legally privileged and a confidential situation where an investigation has been conducted and you want to mention that this is a legally privileged document which doesn't need to go to the counterparty, will you be able to apply that same data privacy law restrictions in each country? The answer is no. In Southeast Asian countries, it's very common for a law enforcement agency to override that, but may not be common maybe in the other countries. I'll give you a very nice example. There was a GDPR restriction of sharing very specific data of or HR data of a company. We were performing an investigation from India for multiple locations, including Scotland. But because of the data privacy requirement, we had to conduct analytics only going in Scotland. So we actually flew our team member from India to Scotland so that the individual can analyze the data on their machines within their cloud software, and there is no knowledge being transferred or any information of a PII being moved outside the country. So to that extent, there could be a restriction or on the transfer of data. Now, is it a single compliance law? The answer is no. You see the list, you have a different requirement for European Union, separately for China, Singapore, Australia, India, Brazil, Canada. And do they say the same amount of restrictions and relaxations? Again, the answer is no. So as an internal auditor, when you're performing an investigation, none of us would want to be a situation where, for the interest of the company or the client, we performing an investigation to identify something wrong, but we enter into a situation where we ourselves have been non-complied of any of these data privacy regulations. And hence, when you talk about the complexity of investigation, one critical thing is complexity of the usage of data for performing an investigation. I would suggest some gold standards, what you can keep in mind when you do this investigation. At the beginning of the investigation, these are the 6 points that you need to keep in mind. Cover all the areas of the regions where you're conducting an investigation. Understand their local regulation. If we are as not a legal professional, if we are accountants, seek an advice from a legal counsel if required. Identify the lawful basis for processing data. Once you get the data, what is the best way I can process the data for conducting an investigation? Are there any disclosures required for transferring data? Assuming I want to do an investigation in India, which covers India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, neighboring countries, Singapore, and others. Can I get the data all in India? Understand the cross-border data transfer requirement. To large extent, try to minimize the data collection and processing requirement. Quite often it's said, in an investigation we did once, we got a chance to conduct electronic data discovery opportunity to take all the data of the email dump for an investigation for the entire organization. Now, it was us who had to do only a carve out of what was required, because the more we collect data as a professional, the more we will have to be vigilant about multiple jurisdictions of what the data and how the data could be used. If you don't need the data, please don't take it. Only minimize the collection to the extent required as per the investigation, and only do the processing on a need base. Even that is important. If the data is only collected, but it is collected for a future reference from a legal standpoint, but it's not required to be reviewed. Like, I'll give you an example. There was a breach of data from the European team. Basically, the team, it was a large IT company, had most of their employees travel across the globe, and they identified a data breach, which is going to be from their employees in the server, which is more focused on the Europe clients. Now they collected all the data, which was important for them to be sure that there is not further any deletion or any issue on data transfer, but they did not process it. They kept it from a repository standpoint because they never intended to do any investigation. And the last point is limit the purpose of process data. Quite often when we have an investigation hat, we believe let's do everything under the sun. But what means is that quite often we use the personal data, assuming in a vendor master, in a customer master, in an HR master, or from a portal, which could be of our question. During the investigation, these are the 4 things that you can keep in mind. Notify persons whose data is processed if required by law. A very classic case. While performing an investigation, assuming there's a requirement to check and do a background check on an individual. Now, if that individual is a US national, the law mandates for them locally to seek approval and or at least notify the individual before performing any checks. But in India, it's voluntary. So many of us as an organization would have gone to joining new organizations. We would have got a list of documents when we join a new company. One amongst them would also be that I hereby authorize to use my data for performing a background check on me, but not necessarily all organizations do that. The second one is comply with rules governing transfer data across jurisdiction. Interestingly, we had a data in Europe. It was supposed to be processed and reviewed in India and Australia, but it was going to pass through Australia. It's important for us to know the Australian governing laws also, because one of the countries that it was basically going to get the data transferred from. Adopt as much as possible security measures, especially on the personal data. Quite often we have seen when it comes to personal data, it gets redacted or, it becomes XX000 so that it's not identifiable, or maybe it's star, 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 and only the last 3 digits or 4 digits known. The idea to do is that it's as encrypted as possible. The personal data can be less misused. And of course, use an encrypted platform for any data transfers that you do. After the investigation, what do you do with the data? Do you retain the data the way it is, or do you shred off the data? I think, we quite often just have that in our laptops. We quite often have that in maybe on the servers, and it is for perpetuity. But that's actually not the case. After the investigation has been performed, especially which is prone to data privacy, you may not want to be a situation that 10 years down the line, someone else has accessed it, because data privacy laws do not have a timeline to it. Conduct an impact assessment of what is the high-risk data I have. Understand what is required from a data retention standpoint and set up a proper protocol to dispose the data correctly, which means it has to be deleted, and it's not just Control-Alt-Delete. It has to be done in a much more methodical and forensic way, and maintain those records to prove your approach. If tomorrow you've been asked, or 10 years down the line you've been asked what was my data and how was my data misused, if any. As an internal auditor, I know quite often we see these documents and records which we use, but I want to give a little different perspective. While the aspects remain almost similar from a cross-border investigation, and there's a lot of overlap with the general investigation, but there are certain aspects which require a much more deeper review. A few of these examples are obtaining permissions, consent and privacy, legal compliance, record keeping and updates. I think I've spoken enough on consent and permissions. It's important that we maintain a checklist to capture how was the data received, what did we do, what was analysis performed, how is the data being then finally been produced, how does it form part of my final reporting, and how have I then, after the reporting has been done and the investigation has been completed, how have actually been disposed the data. In investigation, if you need interviews, maintain a proper interview notes. Chain of custody is very important. When electronic data has been collected, I have seen more than 3 instances in my career where a suspect challenges that the data, that the collection of data which has been conducted was incorrect, and that has led to his deletion or his data being not been available with him, and he going legal against the same for the same. So chain of custody is absolutely important. From every hand to hand that a data gets transferred has to be covered in the form of a chain of custody, signed, timestamped, name, and the authority is required to be mentioned. Obtain legal permissions if required, and maintain a very thorough internal work papers. As an internal auditor, we definitely have a habit of maintaining internal work papers, but often we have a lot of working sheets, final sheets, I would say version of a final sheets and final sheets. What is important is we do a track down of what our report is, of each number, each observation back to our source documents. To that extent, we should have our internal work papers strong. Finally, as an internal auditor on an investigation, I may not be able to define whether anything which was conducted incorrectly, let it be a general investigation or cross-border, whether it resulted into a fraud or not. So it's important you should reach out to counsel to seek advice and also understand what are the regulatory requirements, and also ensure that during and after the investigation, the whistleblower safeguards and everything are being maintained correctly. Now, what are the external records? So one of the aspects of an investigation is definitely accessing and use of external records and performing market inquiries. I think, investigators on the call will know it's important for us to get the information outside in as well as inside out. My last slide spoke more about the internal data. This slide will talk about more on the external records that we maintain. Number one, challenges in accessing publicly available information. Actually, we are blessed with something with MCA's records. When you talk about list of directors, list of companies, authorized capital, paid up capital, annual reports. Actually, we are blessed. I did a case which covered Nepal. Nepal has nothing similar to MCA records. Everything was to be done on the ground in physical papers. So even if we talk about publicly available information, it is not the same which you may have, or it may not be it may be incomplete. So there's always a risk around that. Publicly available information as well as what is available from corporate records is very critical when you do any investigation. What is required is, while doing inquiries, you need a local support. Imagine an investigation to be done by us in different parts of the country, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and Kolkata. Do you think a single person can conduct an investigation with using the local language and understanding the local demography in these 3 states? I'm not talking about 3 countries as a cross-border. Of course, that's more complicated. Assuming a situation which is in Europe, in Asia, as well as in Africa, even in India, it becomes very difficult if you don't have local support for conducting inquiries. What is another challenging thing which we see is accessing data in tax haven countries. The tax haven countries have become so opaque. They have such an opaque legal structure. They have a complex corporate record keeping structure, multiple approvals and permissions required, and a very limited information available. Because in such countries, so I did an investigation which basically said that one person has made money and the money has been transferred to Luxembourg and has been transferred to Delaware. Now, it was almost a 3 weeks job, which being in India, we could have done it in a fraction of minutes because we have records available online just to identify whether that individual is a director in a company or not. 3 weeks. Because it's so complex, it's so opaque, you need to visit them, you need to make an application with a local lawyer, you need to give a justification why you need it. And even after doing all of these things, the information will be as, I would say, limited as it could be. Varying pretexts and nature of inquiries. So I can tell you, as I talked to you about pretexts of how do you actually get information from. So these pretexts are primarily the way through which you get source inquiries. They can't remain the same. They change. They need to be changed based on the type of information you need, the source that you're talking to, and the depth of information that you need. If just a broad market sense is required, it is not difficult. But for an investigation, you want to know what was the modus operandi adopted in India versus what was adopted in Singapore or Hong Kong, or what was adopted in maybe in the US. You need to have varying days to which you can get the information. Who all were involved? Since when this is happening? Is it known to the management? All these questions normally come into play when we perform an investigation. And of course, there are limitations in conducting discrete inquiries. Do you think in the Middle East, we can ask someone to do a discrete inquiry? Example, a Qatar, Saudi Arabia? The answer is no. Do you think even it's practically possible to go to the farthest of British Virgin Islands and get inquiries done? The answer is very difficult. So these are certain challenges which you face when you do an investigation from a multiple jurisdiction standpoint. And the idea for me to tell you is that while we perform investigations at an India level and overseas, these are the factors which basically have a lot of interplay for us to consider. And finally, a veracity in evidence gathering. Quite often we've seen organizations believe that even the fact that someone has interacted on a personal ground with a vendor is enough to take action. And we've seen organizations who believe that the evidence should be as strong enough for someone to say that, can you give me money? So it's very important for us to understand the veracity and the depth of knowledge required. And does it stand the litmus test? Whether the evidence that I've gathered stands the litmus test. Whether I have not been biased. Whether the information that I received has been legally okay. Whether it is self-explanatory. All of these factors play an important role for us to say whether it's a good evidence or whether it's like a strong evidence versus whether it's a circumstantial evidence or whether it's an indirect evidence. An interesting topic which is very common we know that more than almost 50%, and as per the ACF, it's 43% of the investigations are conducted because there has been a tip from a whistleblower. But do you think whistleblowing and getting an investigation done is very straightforward? It may not be. Again, let's go back to our mobiles. Let's respond to this, please. I'm waiting for a response. Can I get some more response, please? Interesting. Monetary compensation. We have a large forum today. I'm expecting some good count of responses. Anonymity. Very good. Yes. A very strong count on anonymity. Last 30 seconds. Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me just give you some unique challenges when you encounter, especially in terms of whistleblower. See, every jurisdiction have a complex way of reporting a complaint. There are very different legal protections which a whistleblower can get. The confidentiality concerns are always the same for any person anywhere. The whistleblower laws and standards itself are not consistent. The best example is in US, UK, India, we have a standard whistleblower protection laws. But Egypt, Morocco, Mexico, they don't have any defined whistleblower law. So if they don't have a benchmark to look into, it's completely on the discretion of the organization which will set up the standards of what the whistleblower could do. Cultural and language barriers. A few years ago, I could say, we had advised the client to set up a whistleblower hotline in the country. And they had to actually set up with 15 languages because they had their presence in the entire country. And what was critical to know is that we can't expect the whistleblower to mandatorily know a language which we know, because there are workers, people who are more comfortable talking in their local languages, so on and so forth. And also the potential retaliation across borders. What it means is that what if I complained? I am in a country which doesn't define a strong whistleblower laws. And I am complaining about assuming someone as a whistleblower of some other part of the country, of the world, for within my organization, will I have the same protection? That's a question that comes often. And quite often, even if there are certain trainings set up by organizations, there is a lack of awareness about what a protection and safeguards a whistleblower has, because of which the whistleblowers quite often step back and do not report if there is anything wrong going on. And just to encourage that, you will be surprised to know USA has a monetary reward based system. And that's why I was a little happy to know in the last question someone mentioned about monetary compensation. But I was also saying not from only from the compensation of the salary standpoint, but even if you give a right complaint, was being rewarded. I think, one good thing, once you go back, you can also check in India. When you talk about an income tax act or GST, and when you see the past years of trend, there have also been something called as reward for informers. Which is another way, same way that whistleblowers have been rewarded for the right complaint to identify the issue at a faster. So it's very important that that section of people who have already been aggrieved in an organization should not be left over. They should be considered at par with all other individuals in a company, and hence they should be given an opportunity so that they're able to say their word. Just to show you a map, it's dated for 2017. But you see in the same globe, you will find some countries with dedicated national laws for whistleblowers, some countries having national laws which give some reference to whistleblower complaints, and there are some which says nothing. It doesn't talk about it. One important thing which came, I think, which was very interesting to know on the first question that I asked was about cultural differences. Conducting an investigation also needs to be, while we do this, needs to be going through the lens of cultural sensitivity and considerations. It plays an extremely important role. Diverse culture norms can help in enhancing and mutual understanding in conducting a cross-border investigations. Use of translators, use of multilingual staff, use of professionals with different skill sets, use of people across the globe for performing a cross-border investigation are extremely important. If this doesn't play a good role, or if conducting an investigation has been in silos, this can actually, be a big concern. And what you need is the 6 non-verbal considerations when you perform an investigation. Legal systems, hierarchical structures, legal norms, business practices, communication styles, language and interpretation. All of these are very critical when it comes to performing an investigation. I'll give some examples in this. I have known countries where arbitration is preferred more than litigation because they believe let's amicably solve under a mediation rule or an arbitration rule rather than going directly to the court. But there are countries we believe that better to file a complaint first in the court and start the case and then do out of court settlement. While performing investigations, we had to cover countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, conducting an investigation there and conducting an interview of a female suspect, imagine the situation we were in. We needed a local female, no males allowed, opportunity for the lady to take as many breaks as possible. From a sensitivity standpoint, HR team, all of these were required for performing investigation in Saudi Arabia. That's the cultural sensitivity which you need to keep in mind. And often I can tell you, the best way of doing an investigation cross-border with different multilingual languages to use a Google translator. But actually, that's not the best way. We are currently doing a matter, where there are, very colloquial languages used. And the moment you just pick up and put it in Google Translate and try to find out what does it mean, it may sometimes just have a different meaning and can create misunderstanding on the project. So it's very critical that you understand the language well, the tone well, how much emphasis a one person has given to others while responding. Now we know some countries in Asia where culture of offering and accepting a corporate gift it's a norm. In fact, people get offended if you don't pick up a gift. But on the other hand, when we become part of an organization, let it be an Indian organization or a multinational, the first thing that we've been told is nothing to offer, nothing to accept. Then when you conduct some meeting, some trainings in your offices, you will learn only a corporate gift allowed to some value. That's again, just I would say a very conservative approach been using it, but that doesn't work the same way for across all countries in which the organization is. So cultural differences is something which needs to be kept in mind, and the sensitivity around it is very important when you do a cross-border investigation. And the last example before I move ahead is, again, I can tell you is, when you talk about culture, we need to keep in mind that while we continue to remain humans, we need to keep in mind in matters of confrontational interviews, in matters where it's a very serious crime, it goes outside the boundary of cultural sensitivity at times. And we need to maintain a very, I would say, we need to maintain a very thin line, ensuring that we don't override what our powers are. Quite often I've seen in confrontational interviews, use of power, use of the situation there should not end up into something which is more messy. An important aspect of a cross-border investigation is also a time zone difference. 3 teams working with you. Someone is processing the data in US, gives you the data in their evening time, which is basically your morning time. And then is expected for you to review it and revert to them in their morning time. So it basically means you have 1 day with you. But imagine a situation which is the reverse. You're working with Australia and they are earlier than you. The expectation would be for you to start early, then sit late, for them to sit late and start a little in middle of the day. So these time zone differences really matter a lot. And I can give you certain examples. A real-time communication in investigation is very important. When you're conducting an investigation, your team is spread across multiple jurisdictions. How do you maintain a real-time communication? Imagine a team that you have, one sitting in Australia, one in India, one in Middle East, and the other one in the US. How do you find a common time? Limitation on resource. So you may not be able to work during Christmas if you have someone working from countries which are more follow Christianity. You may not be able to get work done from places where, like, in large big festivals in India or in the Middle East. So it's very important for you to know that the accessibility to the resource is going to be limited, and the coordination amongst them is going to remain a challenge. It's not a one single room, 4 individuals working on an investigation. And hence, all of these things needs a planning. The best way to do is to have a planner, identify these time zone differences, come up with something which adds to synergy, which is acceptable by all across time zones. And basically, it is helpful. Now, as an investigator, you'd always be expected to be crisis manager. Now, imagine a delayed response can impact so much when it comes to emergencies or incidents requiring immediate action. You made a request in the evening, your time, you get a response 2 days after that, and the matter is gone. And last is about limitations on in-person discussions. We've all gone through the COVID time, and we won't believe during the COVID time, when we had to mandatorily conduct investigations which are confrontational interviews, we knew the fact that the individual was getting dictated from behind the screen. Like, I'm conducting an investigation interview with this individual, and I know for the fact that he or she getting dictated this behind the screen, but I can't do anything because I don't have an option of an in-person discussion. So these are some, I would say, some level of challenges which are generally found when you do a cross-border investigation. Most important, effective planning, set up a clear communication protocols, encourage a flexible work hours when you do such investigations so that it's common for all. Have a local SPOC in each of these locations so that the internal coordination is met with, and use of project management platforms. I think these are the 5 ways through which you will be able to get some synergy and come to a congruence. One of the critical things, and almost a few slides at the end of my session, is about collection of data and handling. It's very important to know where the server location is. Very important to know, are you able to transfer the data? Ephemeral messages like the WhatsApps, Telegram, Signal, they have an option of disappearing chats. There is no trace or limited trace, and end-to-end encryption. So these days, while it is an evolution of an electronic, evolution of being digital, it also supports a lot for a fraudster and makes our life as an investigator difficult. And also some other aspects, various data retention policies, lack of uniformity of data. Assuming you have to conduct an investigation across 5-6 entities globally, some data is in Oracle, some is in Tally, some is in SAP. I think most of the time we'll first go in getting this data into a single page. Some data is in a sales software, some data is in a Weybridge data is in another software. So it's practically very difficult to even start doing an analysis. The collection and collation and cleansing itself takes a lot of time. The last considerations which I would want to tell you is collaboration with multiple law enforcement agencies, use of data encryption and security. Best example I've given is basically in an IP theft matter, collaborative efforts were done, multiple jurisdictions in Singapore and India, and we were able to crack a cybercrime issue. Exposure to corruption, crime, and personal safety. Keep in mind that this investigation will also get an investigator and exposure to a personal safety. Ensure that your eyes and ears are open and vigilant around it. And what can come up is absolutely not known. You can uncover something which you will never know. We did investigation of end use of funds, and we learned of uncovering some other terrorist financial activities, which was supposed to be reported to the SFI only. To the FIU. So very important of how you perform an investigation. You don't know what comes in your way. And the last two slides to just summarize what I've done. But just before that, what is your takeaway of conducting a cross-border investigation? And then I would want to summarize it so that it remains in your mind for a long period of time. We'd be happy to know one word. How would you define cross-border investigation? Complex and critical. Nice. Okay. Oh, wow. Kroll. Thank you. Okay. I'm keen to know as many responses as possible. Diversity and contextual agility and sensitivity. Okay. Okay, so it's complex, needs specialization. You need to find tactical solutions. It's sensitive. Data privacy is important. Culture needs to be kept in mind. I'm sure as a takeaway, once you go after the session, you would realize that first of all, conducting investigation itself was complex. A cross-border investigation just multiplies the complexity. Practical border issues planning. Thank you. This was helpful. I'll just try to wrap this up. So the key elements that you need to keep in mind. Cross-border investigation, it's like entangling that headphone wires. The more you think you come to a conclusion and you've been able to sort it, it becomes all the more and there are more unexpected twists in it. So keep in mind that you need to be on the top of it all throughout. Ensure that you have a legal framework to review before and to cover. There's a data privacy compliance. Required permissions are there and the documentation is very thorough. Try to give as much flexibility and as much as support to the whistleblower so that the challenges of whistleblowers are always being minimal. Be extremely aware about the cultural sensitivity. We need to live with the time zone difference, with not much options available for us, and ensure that the evidence collection and handling is solid and rocket and solid so that it can be used in case required for further litigation purposes. A quick checklist for do's and don'ts, a Pareto rule, 80% of what you should do and 20% of what you should not do. I'll give some time for team to just for everyone to read this. Okay. So thank you very much. The same way, there's an option of a question answers. I give the mic back to the organizers. You have an option over there. There's an option of a question answers. Please type the questions there and we'll be able to read it.
Thank you so much, Vicky sir.
Yeah.
For this wonderful session. Friends, if we have any questions, let us please post on the question answer tab just beside the polls on the Slido. We will wait for another 1 minute.
I think these are points which are typed earlier by the team, but it's important to have a very specific question, and I'm keen to answer that. And if time allows, at least for 3 to 5 of them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have this one question. What personal
data I can't analyze? Good question. So while you're doing an investigation, generally investigation is done, if you see from a corporate standpoint, on all the data which is available on the corporate, or I would say company's database. So personal data generally is limited. What needs to be kept in mind is, the purpose of why you're using the data. Like assuming it's an invoice of a third party and it has the address. And quite often we pick up the address and we say that, this address appears to be assuming of Noida, and this party, and I know the individual has been staying in Bangalore, it doesn't match. That amount of personal data is okay to be analyzed. Why? Because it's come for an official purpose and it has been declared to the company. What should not be accessed is where you don't have a permission. Accessing any personal data of an individual where an permission is required. Travel patterns, financial data, family data, data related to health issues. All of these are something which we can't analyze, and we should not. Because these are, I would say, from a terminology standpoint, they are personally identified information, and they can't be analyzed even from an investigation standpoint without permission. Any other questions?
Friends, if there are any questions, please post on this question answer tab so that we can have.
And you think if this is becoming difficult, Fennel is an option for them to speak out?
No, Vicky sir, there is no option for them to speak up. They can also post on the chat if this has become difficult.
Yeah.
On the Zoom chat also, the participants can post their questions. We'll wait for another 30 seconds. I think Vicky sir, your presentation was very in depth, and that is why uh, there are no questions, I believe, covering all practical aspects.
Thank you. Thanks for this.
Shall
Hope
we?
it is insightful and people can even take a portion of this back to their work.
Absolutely. Shall we conclude, Vicky sir, with can I proceed with the vote of thanks?
Absolutely. I'm done.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So allow me participants to heartily thank Vicky sir for this wonderful session. We all would agree that he has done justice to this topic for this today's session. He has also covered all the practical aspects along with the checklist, the do's and don'ts, the key elements. Also covered how to address the practical issues and deal with the issues of different time zones and how to have a local SPOC, etc. And that is how we can enhance our skills and effectively perform our professional duty on this regard. Thank you so much, Vicky sir, again for this today's session. We hope it has been very useful and it has been very informative.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Good evening.